Welcome to Pro Audio Profiles. My name is Brendan Decora, and each week I'll be hosting different guests, mainly engineers and producers, but also people from across the industry. Enjoy the show. On this week's show, we have Greg Townley. He's an engineer, mixer, and producer who's been working a lot with film trailers. He's done trailers for films such as Dune, Star Wars, Avengers, the list goes on and on. Enjoy. Thank you so much, first and foremost, for being here. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
Awesome.
Nice to see you, Brendan.
Definitely. I'd like to start off by, if you could share your backstory, how you got to where you are, all that kind of stuff.
From the way beginning?
As far as you want, yeah. And you can take some time. This can be 15 minutes if you want.
It's all right. I started when I was 17. I think I got my first job at 17.
Nice.
It was at a studio called SunWest Recording Studios, which is like long ago, not existing at all. Right.
Where
it was in Hollywood.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm born and raised here.
Okay.
So I just started there. I was a second engineer for just a few months. Mm-hmm. And then I started firsting right away by 18, something like that. I ended up going to a studio. They fired their engineer 2 weeks after I got there or something. And and they, I just sort of stepped into the seat because I just said yes to everything. You know, I recorded my first symphony at 21 years old.
Nice.
At Warner Brothers.
Nice.
I had no business doing that. Whatsoever.
At Warner Brothers.
They said, "Hey, do you want to record an orchestra?" I went, "Yeah." Totally.
What stuff were you doing before that? Just kind of bands and whatever? Or?
Yeah, bands. I did a little bit live sound in those first early days. I did some Playboy Jazz monitors, Long Beach Blues Festival.
Oh, nice.
Did monitors, worked house sound at like the Palace Theater. I did a lot of in my early 20s, and then I landed, and then I realized that I wasn't cut out for that. I didn't.
Right.
It's a whole different
can of worms.
Man, those are very strong, very smart people and very capable people, and they work very hard.
Yeah.
But I just kind of fell into recording in studios and doing rock bands and punk.
And there was no school, you didn't go to school or that?
I went to school for 10 weeks.
10 weeks, okay.
When I was, like 17 years old.
Okay.
So, but I dropped out to start working.
Right.
I just didn't complete I went to one little section of the course and just started working.
Cool.
And then I just kept doing I did a lot of festivals and then did live sound at clubs and then just realized that the studio is just way more creative and just better fit for me. You only get one shot, and there's just some really radical things that happen in the live environment.
Yes, absolutely.
It's just like you have to be bulletproof, man.
Right. My biggest thing is you can't hit rewind if you fuck up.
Oh my gosh,
you know what I mean?
Those guys are so badass.
Yeah.
And then I started after that first orchestra thing. I started gravitating towards. I just got calls can you do this? I got in the union when I was a teenager.
Wow.
And they just started hey, and I just went, yes. And I don't know whether I just hung a couple of 57s over that first orchestra or not. I have no idea what I did.
Awesome.
Honestly, I have no idea. But I just started doing television and did a lot of television shows and orchestra scoring and things like that.
Nice.
And then, lots of movies. And I think that I just started, mixing in a way. I wish I had an apprenticeship.
Okay.
I just didn't.
Right.
So I was just fired from 100 jobs. I was just fired from 100 jobs or 1,000. I don't even know. It's just because I just said yes to everything.
Yeah.
And I learned the best I could. And I learned things from, very prominent mixers. And I just not even learned things firsthand, just with this little thing and this one little bit. But then I just sort of developed my own.
Right.
Which is not totally different than most people, but it's It's a little bit wild.
Right.
It's a little,
But you never like was an assistant at a scoring stage to see how people did it or anything like that. Yeah.
No, I just was, and I'm, I walked into situations in my early to mid 20s of just being in charge, being a mixer, because I had gotten in the union when I was 18.
Right.
And I was just like a mixer in front of these orchestras, but I really, I cared about it so much, but it was just the only thing that I had ever done,
right.
But I just cared about I would like kind of try and find, and, if I got hired for something obscure, and we would go to record rooms all over town in Los Angeles because I was born here, and I'd take, do television shows and movies in these record rooms, which was just, you'd show up sometimes, an hour before a giant, 20-piece big band or something with full tape machines and lockups and all this stuff. And there'd be like one mic cable standing in the middle of the room. You're like, wait, where's the assistants? Well, they just got out of here the night before. What? Oh my God. Like I got a band showing up in a room full of producers. So I just, there's been a lot of wild things. Like I've heard people people talk about like how important studios are and assistants are, because you just rely on them so much, because if you do find yourself showing up, a couple hours early and there's just a mic stand in the middle of the room and you need a full interface of every channel in the console, 3 or 4 tape machines, video lockup, and oh God, the things that we had to lock with the things with the, it was really the dawn. And then also I remember coming up and being in a studio working on a record project, and this guy showed up. He just got back from Japan. Mm. He set a keyboard in one side of the room, and then he took a cable and he ran it to another keyboard in the other side of the room. Huh. And he played this one, and sound came out of that one. And it was like, fire! Oh my God. Like it was like the most unbelievable thing you could ever imagine. So it's a way of me saying that, when I was working, it was the dawn of MIDI. Right. It was like literally like no one had ever seen this before,
That's awesome.
And, and the same thing with just a couple of things. Like we just have all been doing this, or I've been doing this far too long. But, just seeing all these things come along and seeing, starting with bands and then going with, electronics and then,
that's crazy.
Yeah.
And you did some like music recording, like bands and stuff like that. How would that differ between, obviously it's a big difference between scoring and that, but if you could explain some of the
no, it's a good question. I always sort of pride myself by saying that I mix orchestras like rock bands, because I started with punk bands and rock bands.
Okay.
So there was just this sort of like edge, and I started in big rooms, big like basketball courts, recording drums, and just gigantic rooms that had no business, recording. They're just not sonically, but the most.
Literally a basketball court.
Literally. And then I just sort of adapted this sort of no net policy. So every time I would do an orchestra, I would sort of do things differently. Okay. Each time. Mm-hmm. And every time I would have a job, I would like try and create something differently. And I remember being on the edge of, I did a movie and I had never seen orchestra scoring with Pro Tools before, because we had always used tape machines. And, and then I did this job with this movie, and I decided I told the composer, I'm going to use Pro Tools. And he's like, what? Wait, what? And so we used Pro Tools, but I used an old like UA console, like the 11-channel consoles, just to give it some analog, because we were so freaked out about it sounding analog, because we didn't want it to sound digital.
Yeah.
And so then I was on that sort of cusp of when, and really gnarly situations where Pro Tools would break down, but there was no other Pro Tools rig in town, kind of thing.
Oh, jeez.
Like really gnarly. Like
Right.
there's, this famous one at
over.
Capitol that
Right.
I'm sure Steve would know about.
Yeah.
But there was, he might have been on it. But it wasn't my session, but it was just, these sort of famous,
Right.
like Pro Tools is down and it's crashed and we can't get it back up.
Right.
And catch the orchestra home.
Right. Jeez.
And then I had this thing where I became the first person to put bars and beats for an orchestra, which is this weird sort of claim to fame. And I didn't even realize I was the first one, but my friend TJ at the time, who was a really talented piano player and musician, and he just reminded me years later, because you're the first person, because I just put bars and beats in front of an orchestra around the conductor podium, and the orchestra panicked. They were like, whoa, what are you doing? What are you doing, man? But then after an hour, they were like, oh,
right.
bar 35. Oh, bar 70. They could just follow along.
Right.
And
So
now
easy.
everywhere in the world that I go and I get to travel, there's just literally in every single studio in the world has bars and beats for the orchestra.
Yeah.
So.
That's awesome. That actually ties into some of my next question. Is a lot of what I like to talk about on the podcast is how to inspire the artists to get great performances. And that is certainly one of the things, but is there anything else that you can talk about that creates an environment that will help? Obviously, it's with session musicians, it's different. It's not like you're dealing with a picky, artist or something like that, but anything else you can think of that we can do?
I remember doing a punk record many years ago, and a punk singer, really just hardcore punk band. And then we put him on a mic. We put him in the studio. He'd never been in the studio before.
Right.
We put him on a mic, and all of a sudden he started singing like, Vic Damone or Frank Sinatra or something. It was like, what happened, man? So, you give him a 58 and put him in the control room and crank up the speakers. I've had artists, sort of famous singers, that kind of come in and they would say, hello, room full of people. And they would say, okay, so here's what we're going to do. I want you to dim the lights. I want you to burn this incense. I would like this kind of water. I want everybody to leave, but except essential personnel.
Right.
And I want the engineer and producer, and everybody just goes, and I'll be back in 15 minutes.
Right.
And so they set their own, and then sometimes you'll have, I try not to get involved too much. Like, I try not to put the microphones too close. I try not to get it too involved, but you just have to make space for them because they are artists, and it's frightening for some people, and with these days, it's very, very different. It's wildly different.
Everyone has a studio in their house,
but not only that, but everything can be fixed and repaired, and it all can take. You have endless choices, and it's just, when I started in my career, it wasn't like that. Like, it was about the performance, and you stayed out of the way, and you go out there and you go there hours earlier, and and you go out there hours earlier, and you make sure everything's perfect, and then you'll get an artist. I had this famous singer of a band that I idolized when I was a kid,
right?
And he showed up, and he's like 2 hours ahead of time for like one vocal, right? And he puts the headphones on. He's like, hello, check. I can't hear anything. I can't. What's going on? And I went, so, I'm passing around and trying to figure out what's happening. And he goes, and 10 minutes, a couple minutes go by. And then finally I go out there and I go, can I just see your headphones? And he goes, oh, just joking, mate. But, so you just make, so it's just about, my sessions, orchestras are different from, I'm talking about artists right now.
Right.
Orchestras, I have my own way of making it comfortable for the orchestras, actually. But individual artists, like, everything has to be, they have to sing as loud as they can, and the mic doesn't distort. Right. They have to have the lights right. It has to have everything in place. It has to be a calm environment. They got to walk in and feel safe. Yeah. For artists. Orchestras are a little bit different to me. For instance, what I do now, the orchestra scoring that we do, wherever it is in the world, is pretty demanding, from a musician standpoint. Right. So I try and give them breaks. So I'll have the whole orchestra at the same time, but then we may play it, as a full pass, and then let the brass do a pass, let the strings do a pass, and everybody gets a break.
Okay.
Every couple of minutes they get a break.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes space for them. And so they don't have to, brass players just, it's too much.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. And it's different too when, there's when there's people that are like slave driving, getting the most possible music recorded out of every second, and obviously with orchestras, there can be so expensive that you kind of have to.
Yeah.
But to do those things helps, get better performances out of everyone for sure.
When you're prepared, everybody has to be prepared. So I do a lot of, score coordination, right? So a client will come to me, and whether it's $1,000 or $100,000, like, where are we going to go? How are we going to do this? What are we going to do? How big's the band? What room are we going to be in?
Right.
And it's all hiring the right people. So, you just want to try and you don't want the conductor and orchestrator up all night the night before, even though that happens all the time. You try not to make that happen. And, and there's plenty of space. Everything is set up. Every contingency is met. So when they sit down, it's just musical. Yeah. All the technical stuff, it's a separation of church and state, as it were.
Absolutely.
So all the technical stuff is done, and you just you have to rely on your assistants. That's why they're super important to me, because I don't know every console in the world. It's like I was never taught. Nobody ever told me the right way to do things.
Right. Awesome.
But you just, you know what I mean? It's a separation between technical and musical.
Right.
And so when when the conductor hits the podium and the orchestra sits down, it's a musical experience.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
Everything is dialed in, every contingency is met, and you just hope that everything's, you have fail safes and you have backups and you have
And that's actually one of the things that's different as well is, in an orchestral session, if it's a, 10 a.m. start time, that means you hit record at 10 a.m.
Oh, dude.
There's, it's obviously when you're with a band or an artist or something, you come in at 10 a.m. and start setting up and dick around with sounds and spend 3 hours, messing around. The session's over in 3 hours.
Well, you're getting sounds while they're walking in.
Right.
You've hit record. You've done record tests while they're walking in, and you're getting sounds with the trumpet players going in the back of the room. And you're like, okay, what mics are sounding good? And I put up a lot of I put up a lot of mics in a room, but I don't use them all.
Right.
Because you never know what corner of the room. Whether you don't have
time to move mics around and experiment and do all that
again.
Right.
For that same reason.
Exactly.
I do the experiment beforehand, which is sometimes without a net.
Right.
Because I'll set an orchestra up in a way that they've never been set up before in certain rooms, in certain scoring stages. There's this famous scoring stage in town that has a shell, but it was like in the 1950s, and no one uses the shell anymore. It's full of equipment.
Right.
So I'm like, what? There's a shell in there. There's like a Hollywood Bowl shell in there. Like, why don't we use that? Pull it all out. So, and there was like, and my orchestra setup is just very, a little unconventional. I don't want to say very unconventional, but it just makes sense to me,
Right.
Right. And sometimes that's the hard part, because if you sit down, you're like, okay, I'm trying something brand new, and I hope it goes okay.
Right.
I hope. But that's just, you have to do that, to me, to create your own sound and your own voice and, and produce your,
Right. And can you share a specific instance where you had to deal with a challenging situation during a recording session?
Oh my God.
I mean,
my God, there's like
one of many.
Oh God. Yeah. I was early on in my career. This is the best. This is well, first of all, I've been aligned the tape machine. I was in my early 20s in that first job I was talking about. Right. I'm sitting aligning the tape machine, and I go to hit stop.
What?
The first track's gone.
Oh, Jesus.
Like, I've done stuff like that. Like, God. I'm 22 years old. I have no business doing what I'm doing.
Right.
And the band just recut the first track because they were planned to do that anyways. It was just an outtake.
Right. Oh, geez.
But you know what I mean? So, and then I think that as far as orchestra scoring, I did a lot of, I had a company once where we did this remote recording. We went in churches, big marble rooms, cathedrals all around Southern California. And I would build a scoring stage.
Wow.
And we would come in, and I had a whole mobile, it's part of my mobile rig now still.
Nice.
But I would come in and I build a mobile rig, and then we put a symphony in there, like complete infrastructure. It's a church.
Right.
With pews, like the thing, like how are we going to do it? But there's usually these wonderful acoustics, and it's hard to find places that were not on a street, like not on Wilshire Boulevard.
Yeah.
And we would go into these wild places, and I think the gnarliest one was, and it's still very expensive because we're paying everybody lots of money.
Right.
And my client comes in and says, "Hey, I want to do one more track," and he has a little thumb drive, and we pop it in the machine, and the rig blows up for an hour. The same thing, like harking back to the very beginning of Pro Tools. The rig crashed. I had an entire 80-piece orchestra sitting there for an hour because we couldn't, even the backup, the whole system just exploded 5 minutes before downbeat.
Jeez.
Like it's just, but again, when you're, the thing is you learn from these experiences and you learn how not to do them anymore, and you have fail safes now. In the past 10, 15 years, I'm talking about stuff that happened in my 20s.
Right.
But these are things that you have fail safes that actually, you create safety, and you're trusted to be able to produce these sessions, and you're trusted to get them happening and have backups. And
Absolutely.
Such.
Nice. And how does the communication work between you and the composer and the sessions? How does how do you maximize that?
Usually for the past number of years, I'm sort of hired as a producer role, more of a producer role.
Right.
Maybe, at least 10 years now. And so I'm privy. So there's two different genres that I work in now, films and trailers, right? So
that's a different genre.
It actually is. It's done very different ways.
No, I know.
Yeah. But in films, it's very, and I've talked about this before, it's very, it's a long path. You're just there just to serve the film. And You're just there to kind of like, just make sure it's a musical experience and not a technical experience.
Right.
You have to be able to maintain and elaborate on any contingency that has to happen. So you have to be able to do anything quickly when you're doing a movie. The director may just want, I've had directors saying that, he on the session with, like at Sony or something with 60 or 80 musicians, he's like, I kind of like the sound of the samples sometimes. Like it's just like wild. You never know.
Yeah.
He just, because the samples do their own thing, which but the communication between the composer, again, it's all very thought out ahead of time, and it's just you're there to just serve it when you're doing movies. With trailers, I'm usually there beforehand and suggesting the size of the band. I have communication, especially if I'm producing the record. That I'll work with the composer as far as getting his tracks, the correct arrangement. We'll hire an orchestrator. We'll do all this. Find again, where in the world were we going to go? Right. And so I'm very in tune with the process, and I'm just like and I run the sessions, and and I'm just very close to the composer, trying to get his vision, to fruition. Right. And that's my job. Right. To get he wrote it, but it's just my job to go, I know what you want. Right. So we're going to watch Right.
And you talked about it a little bit already, but, when you're producing like that, obviously it's a much more involved role. What are some of the things you do even in mixing that would vary versus a project where you're just hired as the engineer?
Oh, man. That's a hell of a question. And I have a very specific answer. Okay. When I'm producing a session, like a lot of times, especially in the past 2-3 years for obvious reasons, there's been a lot of remote recording. Right. And, I've been to, London and recorded Abbey Road, I don't know, 6, 8, 10 times. I don't know. Prague. We went to Berlin earlier this year. I travel around to different rooms. Right. And when I'm there and I'm able to produce the sessions, because the composers these days are using samples that are unnaturally played. Right. Like orchestras can't actually do what the composer's writing. Right. But that's the sound that they're going for. I'm specifically talking sort of trailer producing. Okay. Yeah. So, for instance, like they'll play these really brassy, unnatural, I call it quadruple forte, unnatural brass patches. And sometimes I'll play that for the section, because if they're just going, rah, 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 it can't blend with what they have. It's not going to give the intensity. So I'll play it for them. They're like, we can't play that. I'm like, I know you can't play that, but I'm going to give you a break in 10 minutes. I need you to.
Right.
I need quadruple 4. I need you to give me everything you can, brassy as you can, and then we'll take a break. And as soon as I play them out, they just kind of like, and they'll dig in. But if I'm not producing the sessions, usually everything is at like a lower dynamic because it's hard. It's like these guys are really the best. I get the ability to work with some of the best guys in the world, and it's hard, man. It's demanding, like doing trailer scoring, especially when you're doing like an overdub session with brass or something like that. Right. You have to give them breaks.
Yeah.
Because it's just so demanding.
Absolutely. So. I just want to take a quick break and tell you about my free guide for creating massive snare sounds. In it, I go over all my techniques, from drum choices, tuning, microphone placements, even mixing techniques. Check it out now at brendandecora.com/huge-snare. And now, back to the show. What do you do to ensure that a composer's vision is accurately captured and interpreted by the musicians?
Similar. Basically, that's the same question, because they're writing with very brassy samples.
Right.
And if the orchestra is just playing it languidly and the attacks are slow and all the attacks, especially in that genre, it's about sort of like, bah, digging in.
Right.
And they writing like that. And if they don't perform it like that, then you have to use too many samples.
Right.
Because it has to compete,
Of course.
So, and we don't like to do that because if you're going to spend the money and the time and the resources, and I think that's the thing that a lot of people, we're not there to do underscore. We're there to compete in an incredibly dynamic and competitive environment. So the orchestra, to me, it's important as a producer to just design the workflow where it gives them so much room and so much breaks, but we're going to ask a lot of them. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. Right. And you've already said you have the luxury of working with some of the best musicians. But in those times when you have to work with less experienced musicians, how does your approach differ?
The approach is for starting with orchestration and start with writing.
Okay.
So when I'm producing a record that is, for instance, you have to be careful. I'm not going to use any names or places in the world. Not names, but places, Some orchestras do very well in certain areas. Some orchestras don't around the world.
Okay.
Okay. And I've been in situations where very difficult music is being written. Very, polyrhythmic, difficult music is being written, especially rhythmically. And you'll go to another country to do it, and they simply can't play it.
Right.
They simply cannot play it. And you can waste a half an hour trying to get them to play it.
Right.
And so each time you have to go, well, for that, let's do long strings in this environment, and let's go here in the world.
Oh, wow.
But the brass is brassy, and we're not going to be able to do that there, so let's go over here and do the brass here.
Okay.
Sometimes we do that.
So you sometimes we assemble things.
Sometimes we go, it's not necessary to do strings, we just need brass for this thing.
Okay.
But the thing is that if you're going to do very rhythmically complex and demanding music from a trailer standpoint, there's not that. It's under 5 places in the world. Yeah. To me.
Huh. That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's interesting. You do, essentially like what a lot of people do with records, where they'll do an overdub session and do bits and pieces here and there. I've never even...
You have to find where the strengths are.
Yeah.
You find where the strengths are. And I just done so much of it for so many years that I know what the strengths are of each room and each orchestra. And sometimes you want things small, you have to be careful because, you can go to a gigantic room, or gigantic hall or church anywhere in the world, but the sound's just too big. And then sometimes you want that big sound and you don't want to go to a more scoring stage. You want more of a church sound. So we just, we find out what the project needs and you serve the music of the composer, which harks back to your original, And I think that's
interesting. Nice. And when mixing, how do you use your mixes to enhance the emotional impact of a film score or trailer, and subsequently to inspire the composer and musician?
Just such good questions, man. You're such good questions. I appreciate you. I appreciate these questions. Well, I've said it before. I have this, sentence, loud or off. So there's that one thing. Something should either be well represented or it's not really necessary. And then the other thing is having, when I'm mixing, emotion, energy, or power. So if you're conflicting ideas and emotional ideas like that, I've said this in other, panels and such that I've been fortunate to be on, but it really is a thing, because when you look at it, you're like, well, what do I want to hear? What do I want the listener to hear? And you take that, you push that way out front.
Right.
Everything else is just, it's like pop music. Same thing. Yeah. That's what they do all day.
Thing, yeah.
That's what they do all day.
Exactly.
That's why they have you know what I mean? But it's the same thing. I just have a gigantic palette to work with.
Right.
Some, sessions aren't as big as some, but, 400 or 500, 600 track wide sessions that are, these gigantic things. And sometimes you want to have things really close and really be that emotion of energy. Right. That's why I put so many mics in a room. Okay. Sometimes you really want to pull things up. Sometimes you want them pushed back and you want something else to be pulled up.
Wow.
That's cool. How you enhance the emotional impact of the listener.
Right.
Is you're taking the listener on a journey. Right. I started to get too philosophical about this. When you sit you sit staring at it. But I think with the guys, these smart, very talented people that I've talked about, they talk philosophically about these things, because it really isn't all about the compressors that you're using or the types of gear you have or don't have. Yeah. It's the aesthetic that you have and what emotionally you're trying to show the audience. Of course. I don't know. Yeah. No, we have to think like that. Otherwise.
Yeah. Well, that's what being an engineer is the blend between technical and artistic. That's literally the definition. It's very interesting. Yeah. Can you provide an example of a time when your mix influences the composer's creative decisions?
Creative decisions moving forward?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that happens because I look at things at least, let's just talk in the trailer genre, I would probably say. They will, they'll give me a reference mix. I'll listen to it once and just to see what their intent was, and then we'll create something different. And when we create something different, I've had many composers tell me that when they work with me again, they've actually, I'm just about to do a record next month, that the composer says that he actually prepared all the stems and prepared the session because he knew I was going to mix it. Right. So he doesn't need to focus too many things because he knows that I'll just probably replace it anyways. I'll just replace stuff and I'll just do, they change their workflow because it's very different. Most of the people mix themselves, but when you have somebody that's looking at it differently, you prepare things differently and you write differently. Yeah. It's like the same thing back recording. If they're going to if they know they're going to go to a certain place, they'll write differently. Right. If you're going to, if they know like that orchestra is going to be, if they're going better, it's just that orchestra's not going to be able to play that. So we might use the sample and have the orchestra do these long, beautiful things in a gigantic concert hall and let it just splash everywhere. Right. But we don't have to bother with all the time of that.
Exactly.
It's the same thing. Composers will learn that, and I've had composers tell me that they prepare things because I'm just going to start over. I put all the faders down. I'm not going to try and do your demo. Right. Because you can do your demo, and your demo sounds great. Right. So we're just going to try and do not be emotionally attached to, not be emotionally attached to these certain things. Right. Even though you spent 3 days on them. Yeah. Like they may not be the coolest thing. That other thing you spent 3 minutes on is the coolest thing. We'll bring that forward.
Right. That's awesome. You can convince people not to get demoitis.
It's really important. Yeah, like these, especially the more talented the composers. That's why I don't send them any mixes. I never send mixes first before they hear it.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I'll do on Audio Movers, and I'll do it live because I want to.
Okay. Nice.
I want to see their original.
Right.
feeling about it.
Yeah.
I will almost never, unless very seldom, even though I still don't do it.
Right.
Someone has to know me really well, but I will, because I'm just tearing it apart. I'm not giving them back their demo that they could have spent 3 weeks on. I don't know. But it's very different, man.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And I have to make sure that I didn't completely fuck them over. And I don't. They kind of enjoy it most all the time.
Right.
But it's just so different that I have to make sure that I'm not offending them.
Of course.
Because,
yeah.
I don't want to.
These are people that you've worked with too, so they know what to expect. They know.
And the first time's the scariest. Like, I've never worked with anybody before, because I'm like, don't be mad. This is going to be very different. Right. And I added some stuff. Right. But you just tell me what you want. We can put it back. We can do anything you want. But this is what my interpretation and my vision of what I think this piece should be, so it can be accepted easier in different genres.
Awesome. And this next question kind of is similar to what we were just talking about, but has there been any unexpected moments in your career that turned out to be wonderfully influential on a score or a performance?
Yeah, the first time I remember being back in the Universal Studios, this was one of the most influential things. They're room full of producers, 80 musicians. I'm probably 23, 24 years old. I mean, a kid. Like, right. And I'm the mixer in the seat. And I'm there 3 hours ahead of time. There's a reason why this is the most influential. Mm-hmm. I'm there 3 hours, at least 3 hours ahead of time. Right. And I get everything totally straight. And I'm sorry to talk about these stories early, because I don't ever get to talk about these early stories that much. Do you know what I mean?
Of course.
It's just fun to sort of...
Right.
And the orchestra starts to play, and, I'm brand new at this. And the composer looks at me and is like, "This sounds terrible. What have you done?"
Oh, shit.
And I'm like, so I go up and down the analog console, again, 80-piece orchestra out there, room full of producers and directors and artists, like control room gigantically full.
Right.
And I'm just this 22, 23-year-old kid. I'm like, oh. And I go and I change a bunch of things. I go up and down the console, and they play the fanfare again, the opening cue. And he's like, "I don't know what to tell you. This sounds terrible." Like, what have you done? And, the blood starts to drain. And so, again, same sort of thing. I run out to see if there's some microphones laying on the ground, because it's like, it sounds perfectly fine to me. And I go out there, and I look at the brass players, and I come in, and I say, "So you wear the entire brass section has mutes in, don't you?" And he goes, "Mutes? What?" So it's this big, and everybody's going, how that is the most influence.
That's amazing.
So once they pulled all the mutes out, it just was like...
Right. There it is.
Again, I think that the greatest influence is that you just, as a mixer and as a producer, you have to be both respectful, and you have to be nice and respectful to your crew and to everybody.
Yeah.
But if you're too nice and you're too lackadaisical, you have to watch every contingency.
Right.
From the studios, from the gear. I've showed up to do a film mix, and they were running a hookah pipe was going for 2 months in the room, and the console didn't work. These are just endless stories of just these things where you've just had this stuff happen to you, and over the past 10, 15 years, you've just learned to go, okay, we're going to do it this way, we're going to do that, we're going to be here, make sure that happens, we're going to have enough time to do that. These are the mics we're going to do. We're not going to use all of that. We're going to make it simple, because it's going to work every time. We're not going to waste 10 seconds, like you say, on that downbeat at 10 a.m.
Yeah. It's
going to work perfectly, and that's why you're hiring me to do it.
Right.
So you have to, no matter if it's the musicians, the orchestrators, the conductor, you have to tell them your workflow, that this is a tried and true workflow. This is going to get everything done. We're going to be on schedule. Everybody's going to be happy. Right. And that's what my job is.
Yeah,
As
definitely.
at least as a producer,
Right,
producer
for sure.
role, producer mixer role.
For
You know,
sure.
you have to make sure everybody's happy.
Right.
So it's influential because you can get really nailed by people if you're not really, if you don't have the right crew around you.
Yeah.
You can really get in trouble, and then it makes you look bad, and then it makes your client look bad.
Right.
And then your client spends a lot of money trying to fix blah 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 X Y Z. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's crazy.
So was pretty influential to me.
right.
You
Nice.
just really got to be careful, and in the same respect too, because a lot of times I'm trying something new that's never been done before, and it's without a net.
Right.
So I have to be able to like, okay, well, if that doesn't work, how do I go back to what I know works?
Right.
But each time I develop it, I'll take one thing, like a comedian will take like one little thing and like, oh, that worked great. Let's do that and that one. And then it's just do it. So you do it differently, and you
Right.
grow, and you grow your own way to do things and your own.
Of course.
You know.
Of course.
And when you take it to the mix, it's exactly how you know it needs to be, and it's
Right.
lined up that way. And you have all the mics in a gigantic room or small room.
Yeah.
You can still have 50 mics in a small
why-
room. You can have 20 mics in a small room, but you only need 2 of them. You just have
Right.
to mic the room in a certain way.
Right. Just for every contingency. Yeah.
In different places that haven't been recorded before. There's this one famous early 18th century concert hall where I just put mics like up in the behind the orchestra, and then way back, 100 feet away, 50 feet in the air. It's just and those things sound differently. So you blend and you pull those things.
Right.
Because
Right. Just have
natural reverb is a thing.
Absolutely.
It's
Absolutely.
really a thing, like having gigantic rooms, the ability to record in gigantic rooms. It has a dynamic to it,
Right. Just gives you different colors to paint with,
Yeah. And you can have different reverbs, but it's just, it's different because the harmonics react to, that's why I put so many mics up.
Right. For sure.
Because you never know if they're playing something really small, but it's a gigantic project. It's the same thing that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
When nothing is technical, because I've prepared for anything.
Right.
If in the post-production, the composer wants, I want really tight sound. Like, sure, just grab those mics.
Right.
It's just so close sounding. I really want it like really broad and fast. Okay, I'll put those mics that are 100 feet away up.
Right. Yeah.
And so you have all those at your
Exactly.
fingertips when you're doing the post-production.
Right. That's awesome. Is there any current or recent projects that you want to talk about that you can talk
sure.
about?
Well, I have. I just finished. We went to Abbey Road, and recorded big orchestra at Abbey Road. I just finished that last week. We did 31 pieces, trailer music, and that was really wonderful because it's just a fantastic orchestra. I started a year or so ago. I started my own trailer music company.
Okay.
And it's called Fight or Flight Music, and I'm working on the 6th record now.
Okay.
Doing the producing, and we have some really talented composers. But having been in the trailer, genre for so long, so it just made sense to start my own company.
Right.
I have a partner, and we started my own company, but we're doing it together, and it's really fulfilling.
Nice.
It's a very different tool set.
Right.
When you're not answering to somebody, you're not working for somebody. You can do things like I can mix it any way I want. I don't have to check it with anybody.
Yeah.
I'm checking it with me, exactly me.
That's
So
awesome.
yeah, and and we, there's other projects that are coming up. We're going to record in different places in the world. In Vienna, we're going to record maybe one more Abbey Road session coming up this year.
Cool.
So
Nice.
yeah, I just get to, psyched. I get to do a lot of different things.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. I like to wrap up each podcast with the same couple questions, same few questions.
Yeah, man.
First one is, who is your most influential teacher?
Sean Murphy. That was
Okay.
the first person that comes to mind.
Okay.
Because in my early days when I didn't know anything like I've talked about,
Right.
Sean was doing like, I think what was the score, like Apollo 13 or something. Like,
Right.
do you know what I mean? He was just like a master, I don't even think I've met him.
Oh,
I
really?
maybe met him once or something.
Okay.
I know you have, I'm sure. I maybe met him once, but he just was like just a master. He was just well respected. He was just a master. I think that Rick Hart probably, who was an engineer who did Pink Floyd The Wall, he was the first one that said, "Hey, come over here. and let's work at this studio now. And I was, and we started working at a studio many years ago called Producer's Workshop. And he's still a close friend of mine. And, there's just been you could almost take these three people like Rick Hart, Michael Honig, J. Peter Robinson, those three guys, we did a project together, and literally you could draw a line from those people to every person that I've ever worked with in my entire career.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because there's like that job went from here to there, to there, to there, to there. And it just kind of goes and goes and goes, and you just do different.
Awesome.
Literally, you can draw that. So
right.
I think those people are just probably the most influential.
Nice.
Yeah.
Next question is, what is your favorite reference track? If you have to go to a new studio, learn the room, listen to the speakers, what do you put on?
I knew you were going to ask that question.
It could be a few. It's okay.
I don't do that.
You don't do that?
I don't do that.
Really?
No, I don't do that.
Huh.
I'm going to squirm in my seat a little bit.
Well, then what is a track you put on to be inspired in that case?
I don't.
You don't?
No.
Never?
Huh. No. I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry, dude. And I'll tell you why. Okay. Because almost every single job I do, I'm doing things differently.
Okay.
And when you've been doing it long enough, it's just, and I have had the ability to work in these rooms multiple times at this juncture.
Right.
And even if I haven't, I know what these different aspects are going to sound like. Mm-hmm. So it does come from the performance. So I don't really listen to anything. Because I have had the ability to create kind of my own voice, as it were.
Yeah.
I might, God, that's going to sound, I listen to mine.
You listen to yours?
I listen to mine, yeah.
No, that's fine. A lot of people do that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, dude.
No, that's totally fine.
I would like to say that I listen to this and this, but sometimes, occasionally, like, I just did this Abbey Road project. We did one 5 years ago that was a similar type of project. I just called up those mixes like, what'd that sound like? And then because 5 years have gone by and that knowledge and that experience is, we're able to go, oh, that was that. Now let's do this. Right. So you're never... Because I'm doing things differently each project or each movie or each trailer record, I'm trying never to go backwards. I'm actually trying to always go forward. So I'm never trying to match anything. Yeah. I'm always just thinking new. How am I going to make this better than that?
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I hope that doesn't sound like...
No, absolutely. I mean, a lot of people use their own material because you're more intimately familiar with it than anything else.
Yeah.
And I really love that concept of you're not trying to do the same thing. You're always looking for fresh ideas, keeping things new.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just always, it always has to be new. You always got to create things. I mean, that's how you stay viable. You have to constantly readapt, retool, recreate. And
you don't get bored with your job and you don't fall into, the monotony of the same thing over and over again. It keeps you inspired, keeps you fresh.
For real.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
absolutely. Yeah. Last question. What would be one tidbit you have for an upcoming engineer?
Greatest question of all, right? To grab any kind of gear you can, any kind of laptop you can, find any band you can, find any artist you can, and start doing what you want to do. Never, I should say never, always in the positive. Always try and adapt and to new things and challenges. Always. You have to. Like, it's really competitive to do this, as you know. It's really competitive. So, you learn from every single thing that you do, so you might as well start doing it right away. Grab any band, go to any club, go to any rehearsal room, throw up some mics, get a singer, get a beat, whatever it is, if you're going to do that for, young guys. Because I don't even know if there's actual young engineers coming up. I don't even know that's not a thing.
Of course there is.
I would think they're more producers.
Yeah, it depends on the genre, but there's always people.
Yeah. The very first guy, I was at a club. I'm 17 years old, and I remember looking up at the guy who was wrapping cables, and I'm like, I want to do what you do. And then he took me, we did these big festivals. He's like, okay, come on, 17-year-old kid. He's like, we did this gigantic festival. Right. And one of the first things he said, do your parents want you to do this for a living? Are you sure your parents want you to do this for a living? It's totally true.
That's awesome.
There's Jeff Kolar. I'll never forget it. But again, it's fun to sort of hark back to some of these events. But yeah, man, just say yes to everything. Mm-hmm. You don't want to mess people up.
Right.
You don't want to say yes and really tank somebody's project.
Right. Well, it sounds like you did that. I mean, no.
A few times. No, I didn't. I never really got over my head. Did I do great work? No.
Right.
But I never really got over my head because I did enough pre-work. Like if I took something, I would like cram and like find out answers.
Of course.
You know?
Yeah.
And then a lot of the things back when the days when I was starting, a lot of these things were technical glitches.
Right.
Because there were so many things technically that could go wrong. Like it wasn't. You had links and locking up 24 tracks. And it was like, oh my God, dude. So much of it wasn't like a mixer thing, like you tank somebody's project.
Right.
It was more like, that studio doesn't work.
Yeah.
That's terrible maintenance. Where's the maintenance guy? He's, he's like sleeping in the basement or, he's like, he's not here at all. Right. Where's the maintenance? Everything's falling apart. Like those types of things. Yeah. But saying yes to a job and showing up and being professional, and just not being scared of anything. I think that would be the best advice that I would just go for it, man.
Yeah. Awesome.
Go for it.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brendan. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Thanks so much for checking out the show. Make sure to subscribe and leave a review or comment. I'll see you next week.